Every global economy runs on invisible arteries, and one of the most critical is just 33 kilometers wide. If traffic through this waterway stopped, even for days, oil prices would spike within hours. Shipping insurance would surge, naval forces would reposition, diplomatic lines would light up overnight. Iran has repeatedly threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. The United States has repeatedly warned it will not allow it. So the real question is not whether the strait matters. The real question is this: what would actually happen if Iran tried to close it, and could it sustain that decision without triggering consequences it cannot control? Now consider this. Every day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil pass through a stretch of water barely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and it sits at the edge of Iranian territorial waters. Iran has repeatedly threatened to close it. The United States has repeatedly warned it would not allow that. And in between those two positions lies one of the most consequential strategic standoffs in contemporary geopolitics. This video is not about worst-case scenarios or oil apocalypse headlines. It is about a real strategic calculation: what closing the strait would cost, what it would gain, and why Iran has kept this card on the table without playing it. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important maritime choke point in the global energy system. Approximately 20 to 30% of all seaborne oil and a significant share of global LNG shipments transit this waterway every day. The countries that depend on it are not marginal actors. Japan imports over 90% of its oil through Hormuz. South Korea, India, and China are similarly dependent. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq have no viable alternative export route at scale. The strait's geography reinforces this dependency. At its narrowest point, the navigable channel for large tankers is only about 3 kilometers wide in each direction. Running through waters that border both Oman and Iran, there is no bypass for the volume of trade that passes through it. Under international maritime law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as UNCLOS, the Strait of Hormuz is classified as a strait used for international navigation. This designation grants all ships, including warships, the right of transit passage. Iran has a complicated relationship with this framework. Tehran has signed but not ratified UNCLOS, and has historically asserted that the right of innocent passage, not transit passage, applies, which is a more restrictive legal standard on practical terms. Iran disputes the legal basis under which foreign naval vessels operate in these waters. This is not a peripheral dispute. It is the legal foundation of Iran's argument that it has the sovereign right to regulate, or close, the strait under specific conditions. This is contested by virtually every major maritime power, the United States most forcefully, but the dispute creates strategic ambiguity, and ambiguity is a tool Iran uses deliberately. Iran's broader military and economic position, relative to the United States or the Gulf Cooperation Council states, is structurally weaker. Iran cannot match American naval power in a conventional engagement. But asymmetric leverage does not require parity. It requires the credible ability to impose unacceptable costs on the other side. Iran has that. A state that can disrupt 20% of global oil supply, even temporarily, holds leverage disproportionate to its conventional military weight. This is why the Hormuz threat persists. It is not a bluff with no mechanism. It is a calibrated instrument of deterrence. Iran's invocation of the Hormuz threat follows a recognizable pattern. It typically intensifies during three types of pressure: tightening economic sanctions, escalating US-Iran military incidents, or Israeli strikes on Iranian assets or proxies. During the 2011 to 2012 period, as the Obama administration tightened sanctions over Iran's nuclear program, Iranian officials issued explicit closure threats. Oil markets reacted immediately. In 2018 and 2019, following the US withdrawal from the nuclear agreement and the reimposition of maximum pressure sanctions, the threats resurfaced with greater frequency. Iran also conducted what appeared to be test exercises, mine-laying rehearsals, and fast boat swarm drills that lent the threats operational texture. The pattern is consistent. The threat is signaling, not just rhetoric. Tehran uses it to communicate to Washington, to Gulf capitals, and to global energy markets that escalation has consequences that reach beyond the immediate military domain. If Iran were to attempt a closure, it would not simply station a frigate at the entrance. It has developed a layered approach to sea denial over decades. The first layer is mines. Iran maintains a substantial inventory of naval mines, including sophisticated variants that can be deployed covertly. Mines impose costs even when not activated. Their presence forces convoys to slow, route around risk zones, or wait for clearance operations. The second layer is anti-ship missiles. Iran operates medium and short-range anti-ship missile systems, including the Nur and Qadr platforms, deployed from coastal batteries and mobile launchers along its Gulf coast. These can threaten large surface vessels, including tankers. The third layer is fast attack craft and drone swarms. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' navy specializes in asymmetric tactics, large numbers of small, fast vessels conducting harassment, and increasingly UAV swarms capable of saturation attacks that complicate conventional naval defense. Together, these capabilities do not guarantee Iran could close the strait indefinitely, but they create enough operational complexity that any countermeasure would take time, cost, resources, and elevate risk to commercial shipping. The constraint on Iran's use of the Hormuz Card is, in large part, Iran itself. Roughly 80 to 90% of Iran's own oil exports transit the strait. A closure that halts Iranian exports is not leverage, it is self-imposed economic paralysis. There is also the military calculation. A closure would almost certainly trigger a rapid and overwhelming US-led naval response. The Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, has the reopening of the strait as an explicit operational priority. Iran's leadership is aware that a full closure invites a military confrontation it cannot win conventionally. The Hormuz Card, then, is most powerful when held, not when played. It is important to distinguish between a full closure and a partial or contested closure. A full closure, the complete halt of commercial traffic, is the extreme scenario. A partial closure involves harassment, targeted attacks on specific vessels, or the creation of risk conditions sufficient to deter commercial shipping without a physical blockade. Historically, partial closures have already occurred. During the tanker war of the 1980s, Iran and Iraq both targeted tankers in the Gulf, depressing shipping activity without fully halting it. More recently, Iran seized vessels and conducted operations that elevated risk without closing the waterway entirely. A partial closure may be the more realistic operational scenario. It imposes costs, disrupts markets, and demonstrates Iranian capability without triggering the full military response that a formal blockade would. Even if Iran attempted a full closure, executing it is not straightforward. The strait's geography means the main navigable lanes run partly through Omani waters. Any Iranian interdiction operation extending into Omani waters creates immediate escalation risks with a third party. Large-scale mine-laying is time-consuming and observable. Our satellite and aerial surveillance of the strait is continuous. Preparation for comprehensive mining would likely be detected before completion. A closure attempt would expose Iran to immediate legal and diplomatic condemnation. Even states sympathetic to Iran on sanctions policy, China, Russia, India, have deep economic interests in Hormuz remaining open. The immediate economic impact of a closure would be registered in oil and gas markets within hours. Under a partial disruption scenario, oil prices could spike above $100 to $120 per barrel within days. A prolonged closure could push prices substantially higher, depending on reserve releases and alternative supply mobilization. Oil price shocks transmit rapidly into inflation, raising transport costs, food prices, and manufacturing inputs. Asia would face the steepest secondary exposure. The United States would not be insulated from global price dynamics beyond direct supply disruption. A closure would inject sustained geopolitical risk premium into energy markets, shipping insurance rates, tanker routes, and strategic reserve. Policies would be recalibrated long after the strait reopened. The United States has positioned reopening the strait as a core operational commitment. In the event of a closure attempt, additional naval assets would likely surge into the region. The military balance favors reopening the strait over time. The question is not whether it can be reopened, but at what cost and over what time frame. A Hormuz closure would not occur in isolation. It would likely be embedded in a broader escalation sequence involving proxy actors across the region. This multi-front architecture complicates response planning and increases escalation risk. The worst-case scenario involves a full closure, rapid military confrontation, and a sustained supply shock capable of triggering a global recession. The more realistic scenario is a partial or contested disruption lasting days to weeks, followed by intense diplomatic engagement and managed escalation. The strategic logic of the Hormuz threat does not require Iran to ever use it fully. Its value lies in its perpetual plausibility. As long as Iran maintains credible sea denial capabilities, the global energy system carries a structural vulnerability that shapes how adversaries calculate risk. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a geographic feature, it is a node in the global economy, a legal dispute, a military contingency, and a diplomatic instrument. All simultaneously, Iran's ability to threaten it reflects a deeper truth about asymmetric leverage in international relations. A weaker actor does not need to match its adversary's strength everywhere. It needs only to identify the points where imposing cost is credible and consequential. Hormuz is that point. The tankers keep moving. For now, strategic analysis helps us understand escalation, but understanding conflict does not mean wishing for it. History repeatedly shows that war, in any form, carries costs that extend far beyond military objectives. Economic disruption, political instability, and human suffering rarely remain confined to battlefields. Whatever the strategic calculations, the hope remains the same, that tensions are contained before they harden into open conflict. and that decisions made in the first hours prevent consequences that could last for decades, because in the end, no doctrine, no missile system, and no alliance structure can erase the long-term cost of war.